Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Leticia Castro, and you're watching South Era Network. Coming up today, 4 days in, no sight in the U.S. and Israel keep striking Iran as Tehran says it has shut off the Strait of Hormuz. And Afghanistan and Pakistan enter a 5th day of heavy fighting as global powers urge restraint. Also on the show, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney resets ties with India. But did Ottawa stay silent on the killing of one of its own citizens to seal the deal? That's the question that many are asking. Let's begin with this. The Middle East is bracing for a prolonged war. U.S. President Donald Trump has said military operations against Iran could last 4 to 5 weeks, though he insists forces are ahead of schedule. It is now day 4 of the joint U.S.-Israeli campaign, which has hit thousands of targets across Iran, killing at least 787 so far. But of course, that number is likely to rise. 6 American service members have also been killed. Iran is hitting back hard. It has struck energy infrastructure across the entire Gulf area, attacked the U.S. Embassy in Riyadh, and announced the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, a move that threatens to choke a critical artery of global oil supply. Now, Israel has opened a second front, launching a new ground incursion into southern Lebanon while continuing strikes on Tehran, including a hit on Iran's state broadcaster. Air travel across the region has virtually ground to a halt. Oil markets are surging. Iran has formed a temporary leadership council following the death of Supreme Leader Khamenei. Trump says Tehran's new leadership has signaled a willingness to talk, but for now, the bombs are still falling. But what does the continuing escalation mean for the entire region? The security analyst Paul Ingram is joining me now from London. Paul, thank you for joining us here at South Era Network. Let me begin with asking you the next question. Will the closing of the Strait of Hormuz escalate the situation even farther?
Well, certainly it's going to cause a lot of pain economically to many countries, particularly those dependent upon oil imports from the region and to those countries involved in exporting. This has a knock-on impact on economies quite significantly. So if the straits are closed for more than a few days, I think we will start to see that quite rapidly feed through into economic indicators, particularly prices. And this is something that the Iranians have been threatening to do for some time, and was very clearly part of their plan if they were attacked. So it should be of no surprise. It certainly is what has often been described as the, quote, nuclear option. Of course, that's not literally, but metaphorically. And it means that governments that are not directly involved in this conflict, particularly countries like China and others that have been dependent, will be looking to try to ensure that this situation is resolved, and they will be joining countries like Qatar and others who have been trying to pressure the Americans to dial down and de-escalate.
Absolutely, it's a situation that's affecting far beyond the area that's currently being watched by the entire world. Now, who is leading Iran, and what does it mean for the war, in your opinion?
Yes, well, I think this was well planned in advance. The Supreme Leader, I think, was expecting to be taken out quite early on in this conflict, and the interim situation has been passed on to a cleric, the head of the judiciary, and the President Pezeshkian. And between the three of them, they are governing Iran, in quotes. But of course, the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard, are very much operating independently, and many of the strikes currently being seen within the Gulf states have been ordered by forces quite low down the command chain. I think what we're seeing is an Iranian military that is operating much more autonomously than it has done in the past. And the reason for this is because autonomous operation enables those operations to continue when those at the very top of the hierarchy are taken out. Some Iranians I know have even been describing this as clearing out the dead wood and ensuring that those that have strong ambitions and who understand the operations more clearly are given free hand to hit back.
Right. Now, I understand I'm getting notification that the media close to the Revolutionary Guard, the newly appointed Defense Minister Majid Ibn al-Rida, who was appointed 2 days ago, has also been killed. So I know this is definitely going to take or create different changes. But do you think that this also could lead into a wider fighting, not only focusing on the Middle East?
Mm-hmm. So the first thing to say is that these hierarchies, these command structures, operate very differently from what people in the West might normally assume, and we have seen a U.S. administration that seems to put a huge priority, this one, on who it is that is sitting in the command seat. But I think in the Iranian system, I think it is much more decentralized. Certainly today, more decentralized than it was a week ago. And I think what we're likely to see is a greater influence of the Revolutionary Guard Corps in certainly all matters, military, but also politically as we move forward. Does this mean that we will see a widening of the conflict? I think quite likely. I think I see no indication at all of Iran holding back or de-escalating at this point. As we've just been describing, the closure of the Straits of Hormuz is just one of several escalatory moves. As in their eyes, they see this as very much a response, a retaliation to outrageous attacks, illegal attacks by the US and Israel. We have seen the Hezbollah respond to the assassination of the supreme leader by firing at Haifa in northern Israel, and the Israelis then quite predictably responding disproportionately by bombing cities within Lebanon. I think that confrontation will carry on. There will be tit for tat, exchanges of fire, and we're likely to see further continuing strikes by the Americans and the Israelis into Iran, and the Iranians responding with further missile attacks in the other direction. I think it's quite possible that other allies of Iran, particularly those within Iraq, Syria, and elsewhere, may well follow the lead of Hezbollah and start to operate against American forces. We often think of the US as an extraordinarily powerful force globally and in the region, and it very much is. But those forces are also liabilities. They are targets as much as they are sources of attack. And so those targets...
The situation is definitely changing by the hour. Thank you so much. That was Paul Ingram joining us live. Thank you for your insight and your expertise in regards to what is currently happening. Now, the violence on the Durand Line has entered its 5th straight day. Moving on to another situation that's also affecting South Asia, the Pakistani and Taliban forces clash along the volatile border, while the intensity of the shelling has eased slightly in the last few hours. Now, the strategic deadlock remains. At least 42 civilians have been killed in Afghanistan since the latest surge in fighting began on February 26. According to the UN assistance mission in Afghanistan, the dead include women and children. Kabul claims its forces have destroyed Pakistani tanks and military posts in Paktika, in the province of Paktika, and in response to cross-border shelling and airstrikes. That's what they're saying. Afghan police say Pakistani jets attempted to target Bagram Air Base, saying the attack was repelled with anti-aircraft fire. Now, Islamabad has rejected those claims, maintaining that its surgical strikes solely target militant infrastructures. Pakistan continues to accuse Kabul of harboring Tariq-e-Taliban, Pakistan's insurgents, a change Afghan officials deny as they condemn the strikes as a violation of their sovereignty. Casualty figures from both sides have not been independently verified. Saudi Arabia and Qatar have offered to mediate, joining the UN the European Union as well, Russia and China, in an urgent call to de-escalate the situation. Oil prices have surged as markets react to growing instability across the entire region that's already absorbing the fallout from what we were just talking about, the U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran and other areas in the region. Now, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has just completed a 4-day trip to India, his first official visit to New Delhi and the first Canadian prime ministerial visit in about 8 years. They reached an agreement on a long-term uranium supply deal and promised cooperation in areas such as critical minerals, clean energy, space, and higher education. It's being seen as a reset of ties after they'd hit a historic low. Correspondent Angad Singh has the South Asian diaspora perspective in the situation.
Is selling Canadian resources worth selling out Canadian values? Prime Minister Mark Carney was welcomed to New Delhi by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, announcing a slate of new agreements, which is a big deal, because until recently, this relationship was at a historic low. The previous Liberal government publicly accused Indian agents of killing a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil. But Carney has made it clear that he wants a reset.
There has been more engagement between the Canadian and Indian governments in the last year than there has been in more than 2 decades combined.
For Carney, engaging India is about building a network of middle power trade partners, countries that aren't economic hegemons who can support each other's financial interests in a world order that has been ruptured by US President Donald Trump. With India, Carney aims to double bilateral trade to $70 billion by 2030, expanding cooperation in critical minerals, nuclear energy, renewables, education, defense, and even space. But cooperation can also mean overlooking uncomfortable truths, and in Carney's case, it's a bit of flattery too.
I wouldn't call India a middle power. I mean, India is... I'm happy for Canada to be called a middle power, but I don't view, in all seriousness, in terms of the trajectory and the ambition.
But is acknowledging India as a great power pragmatism, capitulation, or a bit of both? Just before the visit, a Canadian official told reporters that Carney's administration was confident that extortion threats and violence by Indian agents in Canada were no longer continuing. Yet, last week, a Canadian-born Sikh separatist received a duty to warn from Canadian law enforcement, stating that he, his wife, and his children were at risk. And on the very day that Carney met Modi, Canadian media, citing intelligence and police sources, reported that Indian consular staff in Vancouver provided information to assist in the 2023 assassination of a Canadian Sikh separatist leader. But despite this reporting, Carney did not raise this issue in public remarks alongside Modi. Modi, however, did.
हम सहमत हैं कि टेररिज्म, एक्सट्रीमिज्म और रेडिकलाइजेशन दोनों देशों के लिए ही नहीं, पूरी मानवता के लिए साझा और गंभीर चुनौतियां हैं.
In allowing Modi to frame the two nations' alignment on extremism, which is what India calls all forms of Sikh separatism, without publicly naming the risk that Canadian Sikhs say they still face for exercising their charter-protected rights, it signals that Ottawa seems willing to go along with the Indian narrative because it's financially worth it.
Thank you, Angad. The pivotal visit and potentially a turning point in a relationship that had been under significant strain, like you mentioned, as Ottawa and New Delhi look to rebuild trust and expand that cooperation in energy, education, and technology. The impact will be closely watched not only in both capitals, but of course across the global diaspora communities that connect them. That's it for us here at South Air Network. I'm Leticia Castro. Thank you so much for being with us, for joining us this afternoon. We'll see you next time with more.